Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you're well today. Today we're going to be looking at the topic of Infj, Infp relationships, and more specifically the causes which make the Infp, Infj relationship a special one, one that is distinguished by certain characteristics. And we're going to try to figure out what it means for the future of Infjs and Infps. And you'll see we'll have interesting things to say. But prior to this, just to remind you that I have written a book on the Infj type, The Ecstatic Soul, available in the description box, all the links down below. Less than $10, all the countries, paperback and ebook format. You help me, I'll help you. If you want to build your knowledge, this is a very in-depth investigation. So, we want to discuss the relationship between INFPs and INFJs. This is in the succession of videos that I've already published on the relationship between INFJs and INTPs, INFJs and ENFPs, INFJs and ENTPs, and to some extent, INFJs and INTJs and INFJs and ENFJs. I made videos about INFPs, understanding the INFP, and also a couple videos on how to figure out whether you're an INFP or an INFJ, but I have not looked at the relationship between INFJs and INFPs. And there's a reason for this. And the reason for this is that it's a relationship that is actually, from my perspective, a little bit harder to figure out than the other relationships that I've been talking about. Because if you consider the relationship between an INFJ and an INTJ, for instance, well, you can rely on an explanation of a certain isomorphism of function use. You can say, well, INFJs are anti-dominant, SC inferior, so are INTJs. In the case of the ENFJ, what you can say is same functions, just different order. And even the way in which the order is different is not a fundamental difference, it's just a shift down. And if an INFJ is moderately extroverted, they might almost seem like an ENFJ. So it's easy for the INFJ. INFJ, it goes without saying. INFJ, INTP, I've explained that there tends to be this attraction of the tertiary user for the dominant user, in this case, INFJ tertiary TI. For INTP, dominant TI, and everything that is implied by that. So you can check my video if you're interested to know more. And with the two ENPs, well, then you can sort of explain the close connection as a connection between dominant intuitives and inferior sensors, even if the intuition and the sensing is different. So you can find all these parallelisms. In the case of the INFJ-INFP relationship, notice that even though, according to the four-letter codes, there's only the difference between P and J, so they might look like they're the most similar types on paper. When you look at the possibility of an explanation in terms of function use, you start realizing that you can't really figure it out, because INFPs are dominant FI users. That should be something that is a little bit foreign to the INFJ. Now, they're auxiliary NE users. I've explained how NE can come across to the INFJ as an external materialization of what goes on inside their minds with NI, subjectively. But that happens especially with any dominance. INFPs are not any dominants. They cannot attract INFJs as dominant FI users because INFJs are tertiary TI, so they cannot have the advantage of the INTP either. So really, you start wondering, okay, so does this mean that the INFJ-INFP relationship is not actually meant to work that well? And so I think this is a false proposition. But I have to admit that someone who relies, for the most part, on explanations of relationships between types via the functions, which is something that a lot of people do, and I do that myself quite a bit. I use the function as a tool for explanatory uses quite a lot. When you're looking at the relationship between INFJ and INFP, you cannot really do that. You can do that in a localized manner, a certain extent, especially maybe when you sort of crisscrossing like any and ni, and introversion maybe, because introversion is shared between the two types. Beyond that, there's not a lot you can do, and if you try to explain the relationship in terms of the function use patterns, you'd be mistaken if you concluded that the relationship is a good one, and you'd be correct from those premises, which I think are not good premises, that the relationship is bound to be a difficult one and fraught with tension. And yet, the real life examples don't seem to correlate with that at all. And this is a case where we have the world telling us, the evidence of the senses, empirical evidence, telling us that the theory of the cognitive functions, although very useful, is not super flexible, super useful to explain why INFJs and INFPs do seem to get on very well and to enter into very close friendships. So it doesn't mean that explanatory use of the functions is to be rejected. It just means that it's going to encounter certain limitations, especially in the case of INFP-INFJ relationships, which could be a limit case, could be a case that we need another explanation for. And here I think the explanation is better provided without making technical reference to the cognitive functions, and taking a step back and sort of trying to understand what they share, what potential interests they share, what potential proclivities and priorities those two types share. So we've already mentioned they're introverted, they use intuition pretty sturdily, and they are feeling types. Of course, there's going to be some conflict between FE and FI, and there is going to be the source of possible misunderstandings at first sight between dominant NI and auxiliary NE. But I think that if we move to an existential explanation of the relationship, an explanation that, as you know, I try to articulate in The Ecstatic Soul in my book, and to make a case for that as an explanation that is actually deeper than the functional explanation, although the functional explanation can provide a gate all the way back to the original existential explanation. What you'll notice is this. You'll notice that the INFJ is a type that, because of auxiliary FE, experiences difficulty with sharing the insights of their NI. Let me explain for a second, even though I've already explained it in a couple other videos. NI is always cryptic. NI is always in the process of refining itself, of understanding itself better. INTJs can do this mainly via the use of TEFI. So TE makes use of the external world in a sense to reorganize the external world in such a way that its order will vindicate the insights of NI. INFJs can't do that because their TE is very unconscious. Therefore, they have to do that in conversation with other people. That's the use of FETI. But because of FE's orientation to the tribe, the INFJ is always going to also experience potential for disharmony when it comes to trying to express the insights of their NI. So they might expect people to not really understand them, to find them confusing or, again, cryptic, or to leave other people baffled. They might anticipate not being able to explain what they mean very well, and they fear that, which might lead them to embrace the modes of alienation, namely, I should know this, dismissiveness, the dismissive INFJ, and evasiveness, the evasive INFJ, the INFJ that just pretends that his NI is not dominant because it's kind of easier to live with when he's or she is in a group. Now, these are not ideal tactics, but they're often resorted to by INFJ, and it comes from this pressure they feel to not be too NI-led when they are in conversation with others, because they just feel they would single them out as something that they're a little bit scared of, because they want belonging in the group. INFPs are very, very good for INFJs because creative quirkiness, a la ENFPs and ENTPs, but let's say ENFPs because it's easier with an FI user in this case to draw the parallel with INFPs. Creative quirkiness, lateral thinking, spontaneity of creativity is something that any FI or FINE user cannot really avoid. They do that almost by nature, and partly this is explained by the fact that because they don't have FE in their main stack, they do not experience the pressure of conforming to their vision of a harmonious group, and therefore they do not experience the temptation to be evasive or dismissive. You'll notice that INFPs and ENFPs, I mean, sure, they're sensitive types. I'm not claiming that they're not, but you know, you can be sensitive and at the same time be comfortable with your singularity, with your creativity. In fact, if you talk to these types, sometimes they don't particularly identify as creative or as you know, as artists. You know, to them, they're just being themselves. It's because they're so used to being the way they are that it's not something they conceive of as being in a certain mode. INFJs conceive of it as being in a certain mode because for them, it's something that they're aware of because of the pressure they feel about not doing it, a pressure that's self-imposed. When they're in the presence of an INFP, I think even more so than with an ENFP, the idiosyncrasy of the play with language, of the play with the worldview, vision of reality, just the uniqueness of a viewpoint is something that the INFP just does by default. ENFPs as well, but because INFPs are dominant FI users, there's going to be even more of an emphasis on what the INFP comes up with as something very individual, something very singular. Again, INFPs might not be aware of it, which makes it even easier for them to be very spontaneous about it. It's not so easy for INFJs, as I've explained many times. They experience the temptation of dismissiveness or of evasiveness. INFPs, by interacting with INFPs, INFJs can be very inspired to follow the lead of the INFP in this case, like of owning their idiosyncrasy, of owning their individuality. In the case of the INFJ, that's the idiosyncrasy of NI, not FINE. But nevertheless, it is this refusal to be peer pressured into conforming at the expense of their existential fulfillment that they require for blooming in the INFJ consciousness. And to take the example of INFPs who do this just by nature, because they do not experience FE pressure, is really a potential for growth for INFJs. And I think that they're attracted to the INFP ability to do this. Notice that I'm not talking about INTPs as much, because INFPs not being TI dominant will be a little more unhindered in just whatever they come up with and the creativity of it. They will not experience as much of this grid of doubt, which might cancel out some of the possibilities for spontaneous, reshaping of stuff. Again, that's something that the INFJ will tend to treasure, find inspiring, and want to emulate. And in every possible sense, it is a good thing. Emulate as much as you want the INFP in this case. It can only be a source of existential fulfillment. So INFPs in this case hold the key to the INFJ's escape from alienation by the owning of their NI intuitions by themselves and for themselves. Now, let me know what you think in the comments, guys. Consider giving me a like and subscribing, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.